Hello, everyone, and welcome to the SDG Media Zone. I'm Tanya Lewis, the Associate Editor for Health and Medicine at Scientific American. And today our session is going to be on the importance of vaccines. And here with me to discuss this topic are Dr. Bruce Aylward, an epidemiologist and senior advisor at the World Health Organization, Dr. Pardis Sabeti, professor at Harvard University and School of Public Health, who is working in genomics and infectious disease. And lastly, we have Dr. Seema Yasmin, director of the Stanford Health Communication Initiative, a clinical assistant professor in the Department of Medicine at Stanford University, and a medical journalist and author. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here in this difficult and unprecedented time as the world continues to battle the COVID-19 outbreak. The development of vaccines and treatments are more important than ever. So WHO and partners have launched a program called the Access to COVID-19 Tools, or ACT, Accelerator, which is a global collaboration to accelerate the development, production, and equitable access to vaccines, diagnostics, and therapeutics. So I'd like to just kick this off by asking Dr. Aylward about this project. And as you know, we have more than 145 vaccines out there being developed at the latest count, I believe. So if you could just talk a little bit about where we are in this process and how close we really are to developing a vaccine for this terrible disease.
Thanks, Tanya. We actually have over 200 what one might call vaccine candidates or potential vaccines that could work across COVID. And what's interesting about these vaccines is they're not all the same. They're actually being built on what we call different platforms, from very almost what people might call old-fashioned ways of making vaccines to very, very modern ways of making vaccines to try and protect people against diseases. And where we are now is about a dozen of those, just more than a dozen, are in trials in humans. And what we're finding already is that they're able to provoke or cause what we call an immune response, meaning that we're finding antibodies in people who get these products. What we're finding as well that they initially seem to be quite safe, which is very, very important as well. What we don't know yet, though, is whether or not they're going to protect people from the disease and for how long they may do that. So there's still a lot of questions. And so there's still a lot more trial work that has to be done, or studies. We've done what are called phase 1 that says it's safe and what the dosage might look like. And now we're into phase 2 and phase 3 that'll answer those questions. So there are a lot of collaborations that are going on right now to try and move these processes much more quickly so that we can get an answer for people about which one of those many, many products might actually work, and then try to make as much of it as possible, as fast as possible, to ensure people can get protected, and we can get our, not just healthier populations, but get our societies, our economies functioning very quickly. So this new ACT Accelerator I'm coordinating is all about trying to almost repurpose different parts of the international health architecture to achieve this as quickly as possible.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, it certainly needed more than ever at this point. So I was wondering if you could just sort of briefly, give a best and worst case scenario for a vaccine. Which of these efforts do you think are kind of most promising at this point, and what's the potential timeline? I know it's hard to put a number on, but.
Well, the worst case scenario is easy. That means we wouldn't have a vaccine. None of these ones would work. That's unlikely. Especially the more and more we study these, more likely it looks like something's going to work. How well it's going to work, we don't know exactly. Now, one of the things we've done in the ACT Accelerator is map out an 18-month period here, where in this first period, the first 6 months through the end of this year, is really about discovery, figuring out which one of these vaccines would actually work. But in parallel, building manufacturing capacity, even at risk, to start producing it as early as possible so that if it does work, we have enough of it to get moving. The second period in the first half of next year is about rolling those vaccines out to the highest risk populations to try and protect those who might get exposed most likely or might die or have severe disease, so that we can protect the health system, protect our workers, protect our elderly, et cetera. But it would probably be late in the first half of next year or beginning of the, or in the second half of next year, that we truly have the volumes of the vaccines that you would need to be able to shift from the social distancing, the masks, hand washing as your primary interventions to relying on a vaccine and others to help. So I think we have to differentiate a little bit between having the product and starting to introduce it from being able to back off on some of the other measures. For the time being, we need lots of testing, proper isolation of people, contact tracing. That's going to be our main thing to rely on for at least the next 6, 9, probably 12 months.
Dr. Sabetti, you've worked on pandemic detection and preemption efforts in the past, including during the Ebola outbreak in 2014. What are some of the biggest lessons that we've learned during this pandemic so far? And what could we have done differently? How could we have responded better? And most importantly, earlier?
So I mean, we have come a good ways since the Ebola epidemic in 2014, but certainly we did not heed the call, and we haven't heeded the call, year after year for a long time. The fact of the matter is that since SARS and MERS emerged, it's been a high priority. Many papers have been written suggesting that this is a high probability to occur. And we all know that respiratory viruses move very, very quickly. And so while our technology has gotten better, while we have been able to get the virus's genome sequenced faster and get diagnostics started earlier, we had far less time. Whenever I've written about the need to be able to move quickly, I talk about the 1918 Spanish flu and the fact that it, is by some estimates is believed to have caused 25 million deaths in 25 weeks. And that's how fast respiratory viruses can move. And we see these, coronaviruses we know are always sort of pandemics. There are pandemics of it every year in the sense that they are viruses that spread around the world very, very quickly. And so, there's a lot of studies have been done that show that no country was ready to respond to a pandemic, and that the vast majority of countries, over 90%, were woefully underprepared, the US being one of them. And so what I would say is that I think we will be learning a lot. It's tremendous what the UN is doing, what the NIH is doing, what other organizations are doing to bring not just vaccine therapies and diagnostics for COVID, but to accelerate that entire industry. I'm hoping that if nothing else, that a lot of the things that we develop here will put us in better position in the future. Has to come with additional support. Ultimately, we have known for a long time, so many people in the community have talked about the fact that infectious diseases are one of the biggest killers every year. They are also one of the Spanish flu killed more individuals than the wars. The flu kills more people than all of our modern wars every year, but yet we don't invest hardly, we invest a fraction of what we invest in our military budgets, when we know that far more people will die every year, no matter what, from an infectious disease, let alone the kind of fatalities as well as economic loss that come from a pandemic like this, and all the collateral damage that comes with it. So ultimately, that's just telling us it is important. I'm glad that people are seeing the lesson. I'm angry of all the collateral damage that's being done right now, and the frustration from the fact that sort of my motivation every day is to try to help people who are losing their jobs, losing their livelihoods, even from the collateral effects of this, to get back on track, but to make sure that the world sees that this has to be a never again kind of a situation.
Why is it that a country that has so many resources is so kind of woefully behind the curve in terms of being prepared for something like this and combating it in the midst of it?
To talk about the U.S., I mean, it's been long storied that our healthcare system is pretty siloed and broken in many ways, and that that it's not compared to sort of the UK and its national health system, I mean, we have, it's very broken, and that's a huge area of concern. We also have high morbidity and mortality rates of children. I mean, there are many things that we're not doing well when you really look at the numbers in our healthcare system. On top of that, we have a lot of trust issues that are tremendous. People don't trust the government. It's very polarized right now. And the way I talk about it, I wrote a book called Outbreak Culture that really dives into what happens during outbreaks and the crucible that an outbreak is of an insidious, deadly threat coming on top of whatever else is going on in society. And kind of one of the things we talk about is the fact that viruses exploit and they expose and they exploit the cracks in our society. And it's done just that here, that we've long known that we have issues in our healthcare system. We've long known that we have trust issues between our communities and the police and the government. And all of that, it just comes to light during something like this. And so this is something even, a lot of my colleagues have long been pushing for more genomic surveillance, more diagnostics in the US and have struggled to get funding and support for it. We've long been aware that this is a problem. This is not a situation where you want it, this is for it to come to light and for it to be made clear. We hope that the US would have done something earlier, but alas, here we are.
Dr. Yasmin, I'd like to ask you about, when we do develop a vaccine, how do we really ensure that not only is it available to everyone who needs it, rich countries and poor countries, rural areas, and big cities, but, how do we also ensure that, people are open to, having a vaccine? And we've seen this incredible levels of vaccine hesitancy around the country, and I'm wondering how you see us starting to kind of address this worrisome trend.
I think it's really important for us to address the fact that the same accelerated vaccine development timeline, the same ambitious vaccine delivery goals that fill us with hope and excitement and make us very excited about science, those same accelerated timelines and scientific advancements fill many other people with fear, terror, and anxiety. So we don't have a vaccine right now, but on one single day in June, one anti-vaccine messaging tracking project tracked 8,000 anti-vaccine messages that were spreading online. And many of these messages frame vaccines as being oppositional to, for example, the American way of life. They frame vaccines as being in opposition to freedom, autonomy, and independence, and even in opposition to human rights. So at the same time that we are speeding up this process, which I am fascinated and excited by, we have to address these concurrent information messages, these campaigns that are fostering distrust around vaccines. And it is important that we understand that people who are vaccine hesitant, vaccine skeptical, vaccine resistant, they are not a monolith. They include everybody from the Somali mother in Minnesota who's been targeted for over a decade by very sophisticated disinformation campaigns. They include the person who trained me to be a yoga teacher. They are anti-vaccine folks are not a monolith. And there are very deep reasons why people are hesitant or resistant to vaccines. And we often think about it as, well, I'm just going to give you facts. I'm going to give you scientific evidence and facts that vaccines are safe. And we're actually kind of ignoring the fact that we are dealing with issues of identity, issues of belief, and issues of community and belonging. So my concern, and this builds on what Bruce said, is that actually a worst case scenario could be a scenario where we have safe and effective vaccines, multiple, but that these are launched into an environment where half of the populations in some countries say, I don't want any of that. And already we are seeing with some surveys around half of some American groups saying, even if a potentially pandemic ending vaccine becomes available, I will refuse it because I don't think vaccines are safe. That really worries me. And so I hope that as public health workers, as public health institutions, we really not just take that seriously, but that we think in very sophisticated ways about how we might counter those false narratives. We often take a big and broad, factual messaging approach, and it's not very effective. We actually need to do more sophisticated messaging that's very tailored to the specific information needs of specific communities. We need to do more listening before we do that messaging. We need to understand that for some folks, public health is synonymous with unethical experimentation in their communities. There are so many communities that are disenfranchised from the scientific process, from scientists. So our work really needs to begin with building bridges, building trust, and then hopefully building a lot of trust around vaccines.
That key point she ended on, that issue of trust, right? This is what we're dealing with. And this is what makes such a challenge in this current environment, because trust is something that's built over years and decades, and it's not something that's going to be built in minutes and hours, exactly like Seema said, because here are the facts. This is a good idea. That part has put it similarly, the experience from other events. And the reality is, we're going to have, you have people who are pushing on one side so quickly to end the pandemic, of course, and get us out of, the combination of health, medical, societal, economic challenges. But that runs up against the time that it's going to take to build the confidence, build the trust, explain the realities, and also recognize that at the end of the day, it's not a monolith, but only parts of what's left are going to move. Some positions are never going to move, some will. And it's a very dangerous period because you can easily push the wrong direction by not knowing, as Seema said, what the right messages are, what the right channel is for populations. And this is where organizations like ours, I mean, the World Health Organization has changed so much in the time that I've been here, because the recognition that you've got to have those expertises. It's not all about the medicine and the science. You've got to have that social science, anthropological, and other expertises, behavioral insights that are going to be so important to making the uptake of any vaccine. And this is not unique to the United States, nor is it unique to industrialized countries. This is a global phenomena that we're facing. And that's part of the reason, by the way, as we talk about solutions, and we started on vaccines, but when we set up ACT, we're looking at therapeutics, diagnostics, Partis's field, because you need that whole complementary tools to be successful on a disease, because people are going to accept different things at different phases for different risks, and we have to approach this holistically.
I was going to add that although building trust can take a very long time, I think in the same way that we're accelerating the vaccine development timeline, there are some best practices that we have in science communication that can help us accelerate some of that trust building. Everything from community engagement programs to really listening and building relationships with key stakeholders and communities. So although the anti-science and anti-vaccine movements have been gaining momentum in very worrying ways, I still hold hope that we can develop more sophisticated public health messaging, that we can do a better job of really listening to communities and tapping into expertise around public health communication, because honestly, our survival, our well-being really depends on it.
I think that's a really wonderful maybe point to end on there, because I think it pulls together, these different threads of, developing the science as fast as we can, but also making sure that we don't leave behind that public policy communication side of things, to make sure that we really bring everyone along, because that's ultimately, we're all in this horrible situation together. And I think, the more that we can listen to each other and, communicate information accurately and sensitively, I think that's the best that we can do. I just want to thank all of our panelists today for joining us in this session on the importance of vaccines. I hope that you all stay safe and stay healthy, and thank you for being part of this conversation.